What type of document, what type of literature is Revelation? What's its genre? And when you think about the New Testament, the Old Testament, there are a variety of different types of literature in the Bible. There's narrative, right, stories. There's legal documents, right, the book of Leviticus, thou shalt not. Right? There's poetry, like the book of Psalms. There's wisdom literature, right, documents meant to help people become wise people. There's epistles, letters. So what is Revelation? And why is genre important? Well, genre is important because you don't interpret poetry the same way you interpret law. Right? And so it's important to think about Revelation. Essentially, there are three genres represented in Revelation. The first is the epistle or the letter. And so, as bookends, this document has a lot of things that kind of make it like a letter. It's the author's identified, it's directed to a specific group of people, right? And so there's a lot of things that are representative of a letter. Which means that we have to understand it like the other letters of the New Testament, that it's dealing with particular problems of those congregations that it's directed to. And chapters 2 and 3 bear that out. And so we see that there's that part. It's an occasional document to specific groups. A second genre of Revelation is that of prophecy. And several times throughout the letter, John specifically refers to his experience and what he's written as prophecy. That's the word he uses and talks about the prophets. And of course, prophecy was an important part of the Old Testament, which John is so dependent upon in Revelation. But in thinking about biblical prophecy, there are two types of prophecy. The first we might call foretelling. Foretelling, of course, refers to the prediction of future events. Things that would take place in the near future or the far future. And when we think of something like messianic prophecies, those prophecies about the coming of Jesus, okay, told several hundred years before his birth. And so that's an example of foretelling. Foretelling, on the other hand, was the message of God to contemporary situations. And so if you look at the book of Isaiah or the book of Jeremiah, these are documents where the prophet has a message for his contemporary audience about what God is doing and what God is going to do because of their actions and behavior. Most prophecy in the Bible is forthtelling. Very, very little of the prophecy. Right? We're hanging Revelation out here, and we'll get to that question. Is it talking about future events or not? Most of the other prophecy in the Bible is forthtelling. It's dealing with contemporary situations. Very little of it is foretelling. And then finally, the third genre represented in Revelation is apocalyptic. And in fact, some people would place apocalyptic as a type of prophecy. The term apocalyptic comes from a Greek word that is used in verse 1 of Revelation, the apocalypse of Jesus Christ. Most translations would have the revelation of Jesus Christ, but it translates the Greek word apocalypsis. So apocalyptic literature kind of comes from the book of Revelation as an example. There are several examples from early Jewish and Christian documents of apocalyptic writing, many of them very similar to Revelation. And we can see pieces of the book of Daniel, pieces of the book of Ezekiel, as well as a lot of other documents not in the Old Testament or the New Testament that are apocalyptic in nature. Well, what are the characteristics of something that makes it apocalyptic? First is, very clearly in the book, is a rather negative view of the world. And a very negative, and world here we're talking about culture, politics, economics, right? Those things outside the people of God are viewed very negatively. Right? There's a corrupting influence. Right? And so there's a lot of those kind of things. And out of that, there is the presentation of the hope of salvation. Right? The redeeming of God's people out of that negative situation, out of that corrupting influence. Thirdly, apocalyptic literature is very symbolic. There are a lot of symbols used, animals, numbers, all sorts of things that are meant to represent something else. Right? And so it says lampstand, it means church, right? As we'll see in chapter 1. It says bear, it means this world power. For example, in the book of Daniel. A fourth part of apocalyptic literature is there's usually some sort of mediator explaining to the prophet, the seer, the visionary, what's going on. In Jewish and Christian apocalypses, it's usually an angel. There's an angel of God saying, right, this is the message, this is what it means. Often the information presented in an apocalyptic book is presented as kind of a secret knowledge. Not secret from the people of God, but secret from those outside. Right? There's something being revealed, hence it's not known. Sixth, the apocalyptic worldview is often very dualistic. There is a very sharp distinction between God and Satan. And so it's kind of like these are the two forces at work. There's also a very clear distinction between the present age and the age to come. Right? So there's the now and there's what's coming in apocalyptic literature. But finally, one of the main themes of most apocalypses, whether biblical ones or external Jewish and Christian ones, God is victorious. Evil is put down, evil is stopped. And so Revelation has characteristics of all of these. But it is quite different from other examples of these, right? Revelation is quite different than Isaiah. Revelation is quite different than Romans. And there are a lot of ways Revelation is quite different than other apocalypses written in the past. And that, of course, has led people to interpret the document in a variety of ways. Essentially, there are four interpretations of Revelation, four major ones. There's some other minor ones, and there are sometimes some variations on each of these. But essentially, these four, and these are the four that Greg really focuses on in his work, these are the main ones that Christians have used to interpret Revelation. And we'll take each of these in a little bit more detail. Again, we're still going to kind of be brief, but give you a little bit more idea about what these different ones are. Let's start with the preterist. The preterist view essentially says that the events of Revelation, the things prophesied in Revelation, took place shortly after the writing of the document. And so the things that John sees have been fulfilled. Within the preterist view, there are kind of two main views about what it's about, and again, that goes back to the early date and the late date. Some say it's about the destruction of Jerusalem, others say it's about the fall of Rome. And of course, if it is about the fall of Rome, Jerusalem, it would have to have been written before AD 70. But even within the preterist view, there are some people who would say there are some things toward the end of the book that are still not fulfilled. There are things about the end of time, but most of it has already been fulfilled. Some would even say all of it has been fulfilled, but there are some other preterists who would say there are still some things that are waiting to be fulfilled. Essentially, the view of the preterists is that Revelation is a symbolic warning of God's coming wrath on lax Christians and the persecution of Rome. But of course, if you kind of accept the preterist view, one of the things to ask is, if everything is about the fall of Jerusalem or the fall of Rome, what use does the book have for the contemporary Christian, or really anybody after the 5th century when Rome fell? And so that's one of the things the preterist has to kind of suggest and come up with. Right? What's it matter to us today if it's all about things that took place in the past? Now, obviously, the preterist says those last chapters have something about the end of time. Right? You can still find some meaning in that. So that's a question of the preterist view. Another view is the historicist view. The historicist view is not a major view today. At one time it was very popular. Within the past 60, 70 years it's declined. There aren't too many people that would support it. But essentially the historicist view argues that Revelation prophesies major historical events between the time John wrote it and the second coming. And so it's kind of a roadmap of the entirety of Christian history. And so in the symbols of Revelation, you have the fall of Rome, the fall of the Byzantine Empire, the rise of Islam and Muhammad, the Protestant Reformation, right? All of these major historical events are believed to be prophesied in the symbols of Revelation for the historicists. For most of the historicists that would hold to this view, they use a numerical system to say that the days that Revelation talks about are actually years. And so if it says 1,260 days would take place, it actually means 1,260 years. In some prophecy in the Old Testament, that seems to be the case. Right? It says days, but it means years, but it's clearly identified there. Finally, the historicist view also tends to be very anti-Catholic, because the beast and some of the villains and some of the evil characters in Revelation are connected with the Catholic Church in the historicist view. And so it takes a very negative view of Catholicism, of the Pope, other things related to the Catholic Church. One of the difficulties of the historicist view is that historicists have tended to disagree over which events are actually demonstrated in the prophecy of Revelation. Right? This represents the Protestant Reformation. No, that's actually this event, right? And so there's a lot of disagreement over which events would actually be prophesied between the historicists. For the preterist and the historicist, the symbols of Revelation are connected to specific historical events. For the third school of interpretation, the idealist school, the concern isn't specific historical events, but instead the idealist says Revelation is about recurring themes and principles throughout human history. And so it presents a secular view of Christianity, Christian history, to kind of say there's always this battle between God and Satan. Satan appears successful for a while, but always loses in the end. Right? And that happens over and over again. And that throughout time, right, there's spiritual warfare. Christians will be persecuted. They'll be opposed by those in power. And so it's not about a specific government. It's not about a specific person, a specific time. It's about, this is what's going to happen. These kind of things will take place. All Christians and all Christian societies will experience these kind of things throughout history. And of of course, with this view, you don't have to worry, like the preterists and the historicists try to do, of connecting with specific events. You can just say, these are themes and principles. However, Revelation seems to indicate these are specific things getting ready to happen. Right? There's a specificity to Revelation that kind of works against this idealist approach.